Alright, so this video I'm going to go over the different hotkeys that we would use inside of Cinema. Some of these are going to be pretty obvious, so there's not really a need to go into a huge amount of detail. New scene is Control N, open scene is Control O, and Control S is save scene. Those are typically ones you would see. One thing about Cinema is you can have multiple Cinema files open, so if you open up a file or you make a new one, the other one is still like sitting in the background as long as you haven't closed it. And then save scene as Control Shift S. Project settings are Control D. So down here when you first open Cinema, there's your project settings, but when you click or create something new, those go away. And then just to get those back, you can just hit Control D, and that'll bring those back up. And so sometimes you need to get access to these settings. Control F is the search bar, and this is going to be over here. So if I hit Control F, you can see here's a search bar. So if I had a bunch of items in here, I could isolate it just by typing in the start of that letter. So if I have several cubes and then maybe some spheres, I could just type cube up here, and you'll see how it isolates it just to cubes. Okay, so it could be a handy thing, especially if you're looking for a specific item, and that item might be inside of a group, inside of a group, inside of a group. So definitely want to use that. Alt-G is for grouping objects. So if you have multiple objects selected, you can Alt-G to group them, which is obviously different than other softwares, which is Control-G. And just so you can see what it's doing there, if I created an object null, and I just took these objects and put them inside there, that's essentially what the group is doing, is just doing that. If I grab these and just Alt-G, you'll see there's a null, and then I open this up, and there they are. Okay, so that's what the grouping is going to do. An expand object group is just Shift-G. Oops. So you can see how it just actually pulls them out of that group, so now they're no longer inside it. So sometimes that's something you want to do. You might have a bunch of objects grouped, and you just want everything to be just back to where it was. So Alt-G and Shift-G. New object as parent object, Alt-Create. New object as child object, Shift-Create. So these two go kind of hand in hand. So let me delete most of the stuff I have here. If I want to take this and I want to add a MoGraph cloner to it, when I click this, it doesn't do anything. But if I grab the cloner and I drag it into that, now it's going to, sorry, the other way. If I grab the cube and drag it into that, now it'll do something. Click back on the cloner. Now I could take my position up, maybe add some more in here, and you can see how I can, use that cloner. But if it's not in there, it doesn't work. Okay. So instead of me having to go through and create it, drag it in there, if I just hold down Alt and I go to that cloner, it'll automatically drop the whatever I have selected inside the cloner. Okay. Now some objects need to be set up the other way. So let me create this item here. I'm going to put a lot of divisions in the Y direction. And then I'm going to hit C to actually make it into an object. Now these ones here, let's say bend. I'm going to say drop the bend into this, say fit to parent, and now I can actually bend that item left or right. Okay, so now this one works the opposite. This one works by, I had a cube, and when I created the item, it put bend underneath it. Okay, so instead of, again, me having to create it and then drag it in there, if I just hold Shift and click that bend, it automatically drop it below it, and it automatically resized it. So then I just now am able to use that. Let's see how I can rotate around too. So any of these ones that are typically purple are going to work in that formula or that fashion where they need to be underneath. Where any of these MoGraph ones here will need to be on top. Okay, so just something to pay attention to. That's an easy way to add them together. Let's go back to this. Okay, so I'm going to create an object. Now, in order for me to grab the points or the faces of this, I can click over here, but it won't let me actually grab any of those pieces. Right now it's not in edit mode, so I have to hit C or click this, and that'll make it in edit mode. And then I can go in here and grab faces and whatnot. Okay, we've already discussed that in class, but now you see it again as a refresher. And then the model tools, the hotkey is M. We talked about this too. You could right click and bring up the modeling menu, or you can simply just hit M, and that will give you a shortcut list of all of them. And then from here, there's all the hotkeys. So if I wanted to go to the extrude, I could just hit T, and then I would get to the extrude tool right from there. Okay, so M is a shortcut to get to this menu, and then you could go to whichever one you're trying to access. There we go. Now all these menus have stuff too. So like under select, you'll see the first letter is U. So U is another hotkey. It's not on the list. It's one you would use, but just not like all the time. Control Z is to undo. Control Y is to redo. Those are typical common hotkeys. And then duplicating is control dragging. So if I'm in model mode here, I let my dog shake, and I control drag this item, that will duplicate it. Or if I'm up here and I control drag the item, that will also duplicate it. So again, a common hotkey you'll use is that control drag. Jump right to that one. So picture viewer here. Under window, you can get to the picture viewer. It's right there. Basically, there's nothing in here yet until I hit Shift R, and that will actually render something. That's another hotkey that you'll use. I don't believe I've left it on here now. So something you want to maybe jot down, Shift R will render whatever's in your scene. Typically when you render something, you may want to look at different properties of it or different iterations of it. So let's say I put a material on this one. I hit Shift R, and now I can see the difference of that. Well, maybe I want to see what it looked like before and what it looked like after. I could obviously do this back and forth. But sometimes I want to see, side by side or, at the same time. So if I grab one of these and hit A, that sets it as the A picture viewer. If I grab the next one and hit B, that grabs it as the B picture viewer. And then the second I do that and I have an A and B, you'll see I now have this slider where I can go back and forth. So I can look at, this direction or that direction and see what it looked like before and after. And then up here, these are the different ways you can change how it's setting. So turning it on and off, showing the line if you want to, switching the orientation, so it's just swapping the A and B, difference, changing the direction. Okay, so lots of different ways you can kind of preview how that's set up. And this A and B is amazing to use. And then S, which is where I swapped them, you just hit S to swap those. Play is the spacebar. So if you're in here and you hit the play key, the spacebar, it would actually play through an animation. In this case, I don't have an animation to play, but that's what it would do. It just play through all the frames that are loaded right there. And then zoom is plus and minus. There we go. Zoom out, zoom in. Oops. I was hitting spacebar. There we go. Again, common hotkeys. And Control R is a different render. So this is Shift R brings the picture viewer up. Sometimes you don't want the picture viewer. Sometimes you just want to see, like, without popping a new window, let's see what it looks like. You hit Control R, it'll render it right here. And then when you move or you change something, it'll just jump back to where it was. Okay. So Control R is another way to render your stuff. Play animation forward. Now this is in the timeline down here. I would hit F8, and then I could play. It would play the animation forward in here. Stop would be F7. Go to start of animation at Shift F, so that'll jump me back to the beginning of my frame. Shift G will jump me to the end of my frame. Previous key is Control F. Control G is next key. So if I had some keyframes in here, so we'll just grab this item. I'll set some keyframes there. Scoot up a little bit. Grab some there. Okay. So Shift F, go to the start of my animation. So Shift F. So it went to frame 0. Shift G goes to the end. You'll notice on the keyboard those two keys are right next to each other. So it's very handy to do. And then you'll see like the next one, which is previous key, next key, is just F and G with Control key. So Control F, Control G, and you'll see how it jumps between those two keyframes. And if I just use F and G without Control or Shift, it'll just go to the next frames. So just easy ways to go from frame to frame or keyframe to keyframe. Huge time savers for you. Transforming. So up here is your move tools, your scale, and your rotate, but obviously that is time consuming to have to move up there. So if we just use the E key to get to the move tool, the R key to get to rotate, and the T key to get to scale, we can access those a lot easier. Something else that's in here that is toggle axis mode. So we may not know exactly what that means. Right now this thing is rotated at some funky angle. If I go to my move tool, you'll see that it's facing the angle of this item. But what if I just want to move it straight up in the air? If I hit W, it'll toggle this button, which is like, how do you want it to move? Based on the world or based on the object? So if I do world, it'll move up and down, left and right, and so on. If I hit W this way, it'll do it based on the object. Okay, so again, something important, because as we're moving things, we may need that to use that. Moving axis is L, and you'll see this is the axis key right here. So if I click on this and I hit L, oh, I have keyframes on this one. Let me delete that one. Let me go to another one. This one. Come on. There we go. I'll hit L, and nothing changes out here. This button is clicked on. And so what this means is I can grab this manipulator and move it to where I want it to pivot from. So in some cases, I may want my object to actually pivot from, let's say, this line. So I would move it there. I would hit L again. And then now as I were to, let's say, rotate, it's going to rotate from that corner. Okay. Again, something important when you have those instances where you need that specific thing to happen. And then snapping item is Shift S. So this is a little bit more complicated than some of the other softwares you may have used. If you hit Shift S, it turns on snap. So that's just your toggle to enable snap. But all of these different options here are ways that you can snap, like different things you can snap to. So typically I may want to snap to my work plane and my grid points and my grid lines. And so now when I move, I can move free, but then you'll see once it hits a certain point, there's like this snapping that's going to happen to it. Same thing here. You can see where it like jumps and snaps right to that point. And then as I zoom in closer, you can see there's actually more lines. It doesn't want to snap to those right now. There it goes. So once I've clicked off of it and I'm grabbing on maybe this green one, now it's snapping right to those intersections. Okay. So just another thing to be aware of. Okay. Shift S turns that on and off. Sculpting is another tool that we will use eventually. Initially, we don't have a huge use for it. So let's say I have a sphere here. I'm going to hit C so I can edit it. And under the Sculpt menu, I'm going to go to Brushes and just pull it off. These little tabs on top allow me to pull it off. And I'm going to go to Pull. And so as I click and drag, it's pulling. It's very subtle, but it is pulling part of those points off. I'm going to take my pressure up a bit and drag some more and drag some more. And then as I spin around, you can definitely see how now it's no longer perfectly rounded shape. I'll take the pressure up even further. There it is. Okay. So this next set here is increasing the brush size, smoothing, and inverting. So if my brush needs to be bigger, I can use my brackets to make it bigger. Obviously, I can use a sizer too with the brackets. Make the brush bigger. Right bracket makes it bigger, left bracket makes it smaller. If I need to invert something, so right now it's pulling out the shape, I can hold Control and drag, and it'll push the shape in. Okay, so instead of pulling, now it's pushing. And then if I hold down Shift and drag, it'll smooth out the surface. So typically those are buttons that I would use not only in Cinema, but any other software for doing this kind of thing. We're sculpting it. Camera manipulation. So H is to frame all. There's only one object in my scene. Let's drop another object here. So we'll just duplicate this one, duplicate that one. There we go. We hit H, we can see all of them. We hit O, we can frame on just the one we have selected. Alt left mouse button is to orbit, Alt right is to zoom, and Alt middle is to move. Okay, so Alt left lets us spin around like this, Alt middle lets us move, and Alt right lets us zoom in and out. You can use the scroll wheel but typically the right one, Alt-right mouse button, is going to be a bit more accurate as to how we zoom in and out of things. F1 through F4 and 5 are different ways we can choose the panels we have on top. So F2, F1, F3, F4, F5. Okay? Or you can simply middle click. Middle clicking is another way to be able to jump in and out of these views, in which that's what that says right there. Okay? So those are the hotkeys for Cinema. Definitely not the only ones you should know, but for right now, they're good starting point ones. And obviously, as we get more and more hotkeys on there, there's plenty of space on here to write down extra hotkeys you'll use, or find other ones online that you're just like, yeah, this seems like a good one that I should be utilizing.